holding things in a circle around itself, constituting what is present to us as we are. Every image embodies a way of seeing. Like the pilot's view in Dahl's airplane crisscrossing over wide expanses of territory, the perspective of the cartographer often frames the world from a vantage point outside of the space itself, thus giving them and their users and readers a position of power, an encouragement to see terrain as abstract, able to be shaped, flattened, and simplified. The very materials, like maps, through which Americans envisioned their nation, helped constitute a sense of national identity and served as a visual guide for interpreting the scope of U.S. power in the world. A fitting illustration of the stakes of cartography for Americans during the Cold War comes, perhaps ironically, as that very war was falling apart. On December 2nd and 3rd, 1989, during an eventful season of protests across Eastern Europe, Presidents Mikhail Gorbachev and George H.W. Bush held a summit at Malta. Alan K. Henriksen recounts a particularly tense exchange between the two leaders. Gorbachev handed President George Bush a blue and white map allegedly showing the Soviet Union's encirclement by U.S. bases, as well as American aircraft carriers and battleships. President Bush was at a loss for words. President Gorbachev then said tartly, "I noticed that you seem to have no response." Bush, in response, pointed out to Gorbachev that the Soviet landmass was shown on the map as a giant, white, empty space, with no indication of the vast military complex that U.S. forces were intended to deter. "Maybe you'd like me to fill in the blanks on this," he said. "I'll get the CIA to do a map of how things look to us. Then we'll compare and see whose is more accurate." This curt exchange between two superpowers encapsulates the contentious lines and boundaries of mapping. Maps are ideological blueprints. They frame the language of politics in a melding of signs and symbols that both reflect and create colorful and charged worldviews. And as the two Cold Warriors knew well, maps communicate volumes not just in what they include, but also in what geographer J.B. Harley called the silences, or what maps choose to omit and obscure from view. Bush and Gorbachev understood the map as a medium of control, but they also feared what the map did not tell them, a reminder of what they cannot know or control. This power places cartography in a dynamic of revealing and concealing, a reductive, selective, and partial process, where what is not mapped often becomes just as salient as what is lined and bounded on the page. The map scuffle at Malta, though, is not merely a tidy example of how cartography is used by powerful states. It represents well just how important historical context is in shaping our visions of the world. The Bush-Gorbachev exchange was, no doubt, born out of the very particular spatial framework created and sustained by the Cold War. As late as December 1989, Bush and Gorbachev were still committed to the clearly bounded Cold War system, typified by bipolar intelligence maps that contained bases and battleships. As walls toppled, countries reunited, and borders ripped open, two influential world leaders still clung to the familiar cartographic shapes of their 45-year rivalry. Important questions then follow. How did such Cold War worldviews become so powerful and so entrenched through the flat, two-dimensional planes of maps? What about the map makes it uniquely suited to encapsulating the Cold War? In Dahl's terms, how were the blank pages of the Atlas of the Cold War filled? These questions form the basis of mapping the Cold War. When the United States emerged from World War II as an undeniably global force, the country faced numerous decisions about where to direct its power across the world and how to represent itself and its values in this new framework. The Cold War was an inescapably spatial conflict. From the post-World War II carving of the global landscape into spheres of influence, right up until the Cold War...